Emily thought she had found her dream home, a grand, old Victorian house full of history and charm. But from the moment she steps inside, she senses something isn't right. A shadow lingers in the corners, moving on its own, almost like it's watching her. At first, she tries to ignore it, chalking it up to nerves or an overactive imagination. But as the days go by, the shadow becomes impossible to ignore. When Emily learns about Margaret, the previous owner who mysteriously disappeared, everything changes. Could the shadow be connected to Margaret's fate? And what does it want from Emily? As the house's dark secrets begin to unravel, Emily is pulled deeper into a mystery that threatens not just her peace of mind, but her very soul.
Behind the doors.
Emily parked her car on the sidewalk in front of the old Victorian house, admiring the imposing structure that loomed before her. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the trees, creating patterns of light and shadow on the stone ground. The house, with its tall windows and veranda with carved columns, seemed to whisper secrets from the past. It was exactly what she wanted, a new beginning in a place that exuded history. "It's perfect," she murmured to herself as she pulled the handle of her suitcase, full of dreams and hopes. The first steps toward the front door were accompanied by a mix of excitement and apprehension. As she opened the door, a creak echoed through the hall as if the house was waking up from a long sleep. The smell of aged wood and dust invaded her nostrils, awakening a nostalgia she barely understood. "I think I'm going to need more than a duster," she commented, nervously laughing as she looked around. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, and each room seemed to tell a story waiting to be discovered. Emily began to explore, her heart racing with each new space revealed. What made it even more intriguing was the almost palpable atmosphere. She could feel that something else inhabited those corridors, something watching her. After a few hours of organizing her things, Emily decided it was time to rest. The bedroom, with its window facing the garden, seemed cozy despite the slowly fading sunlight. When darkness began to take over, she settled into bed, her eyes heavy with sleep, but her mind still restless. Then she saw it. In the corner of the room, a shadow seemed to move, subtly outlining the furniture. Emily sat up abruptly, her heart pounding. "It's just the light," she tried to convince herself, but the shadow seemed to have a life of its own, dancing on the walls in an almost hypnotic way. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing softly in the silence. There was no response, only a deep silence that seemed to absorb her words. The shadow continued to move, more restless and closer. Fear began to intertwine with curiosity. Emily blinked, trying to dispel the image, but there it was, sharper than before. "This can't be real," she said, her voice trembling. Cold began to slide down her spine, and for a moment she considered leaving the house and finding a hotel. But the idea of giving up on this place, of leaving behind the promise of a new beginning, made her hesitate. The shadow then seemed to twist as if responding to her fear. "Don't be afraid," it seemed to whisper, though there was no sound. Emily swallowed hard, her breathing accelerating. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. But the shadow did not respond. Instead, it approached, and Emily felt a shiver run through her body. "What is happening?" she wondered, her eyes fixed on the undefined form that seemed to gain more defined contours with each passing second. The house's silence was broken by the sound of a door creaking downstairs, and Emily almost jumped out of bed. "I hope it's not a burglar," she muttered, trying to laugh to relieve the tension, but her voice sounded strange in her own ears. With her heart in her mouth, she got out of bed, determined to investigate. As she walked toward the door, the shadow seemed to follow her, floating in her wake. "What are you?" she thought, her mind full of questions. But at the same time, there was a thread of empathy that connected her to that presence. It was as if the shadow was trying to communicate, to guide her somehow, and that intrigued her. "If you're here to help me, then what are you waiting for?" Emily said, her voice firm, even though fear still consumed her. As she did so, she felt an inexplicable warmth in her chest, as if the shadow was responding to her courage. And for a moment, the idea that maybe this place could be more than just an abandoned house crossed her mind. That night, As darkness enveloped Charleston, Emily didn't know that her life was about to change in ways she could never imagine. The shadow, with all its mysteries, was just the beginning of a journey that would lead her to discover not only the house's secrets, but also her own. Emily was determined to ignore the unsettling shadow that moved in her room. However, as the days passed, the presence seemed to intensify, becoming almost a constant companion. During the day, the shadow manifested in reflections on the walls, as if playing with the sunlight streaming through the windows. At night, the feeling of being watched made her uneasy. It was as if a whispering voice was calling her to explore the house's mysteries, but she resisted, fearing the unknown. One morning, while in the kitchen making coffee, she decided she needed some fresh air. The house, though full of history, was also a solemn place. Stepping out into the small backyard, Emily began to explore. The flowers were wilted, but there was still something charming about the disarray of the space. A sweet jasmine scent hung in the air, and she allowed herself to be carried away by the moment's beauty. As she walked, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Tom, her neighbor, approaching with a friendly smile. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a gentle gaze. "Hi, Emily. Are you enjoying the new house?" Tom asked, leaning slightly toward her. "Hi, Tom. Yes, I'm really enjoying it, although some strange things are happening," Emily said, trying to keep a light tone but not hiding the concern in her voice. "Strange how?" Tom asked, curious. Her hesitation was evident. She didn't know if she should share about the shadow, but she felt she needed someone to share the weight of her unease. "Well, I've noticed a shadow that seems to move on its own. Sometimes it even seems familiar," she confessed. Tom watched her attentively, his gaze becoming serious. "Ah, you must be talking about the former resident, Margaret. Many people in the neighborhood talk about her. They say she disappeared mysteriously." "Margaret?" Emily repeated, intrigued. "What happened to her?" "She was a talented artist. Everyone in town talked about her paintings, but suddenly she disappeared. No one ever knew what happened," Tom explained, gesturing with his hands as if trying to capture the essence of the story. "Some believe she's still trapped in this house, living in some way through her works." Tom's words echoed in Emily's mind, bringing a new perspective to the shadow that haunted her. "So, you think the shadow might be hers?" Tom shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know. Legends have a life of their own, especially in old places like this. Many people say Margaret's spirit is still around, as if she's trying to communicate." "Communicate? How?" Emily asked, her heart racing. "Sometimes people report hearing whispers or seeing visions. Others say she guides artists, helping them find their inspiration," Tom replied, with a distant look. "But there are also those who believe she has become a shadow of herself, trapped between worlds." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The idea that Margaret might somehow be connected to her, guiding and inspiring her, left her confused. But there was also an element of fear in knowing that the former resident might be trapped because of her art. "Have you seen anything strange in the house?" Tom asked, breaking her reverie. "Actually, yes. Sometimes I feel like a presence is watching me. And at times it seems like the shadow shapes into a familiar figure, as if I know it somehow," Emily revealed, her voice almost a whisper. "You should research more about Margaret and the house's history. Maybe discovering what happened will help you understand what's happening to you," Tom suggested with an encouraging tone. Emily nodded, the desire to understand the connection between her and Margaret growing inside her. As they talked, the shadow behind her seemed to intensify, as if it were listening to every word. The air around them grew heavy for a moment, and Emily had the feeling that the house was alive, breathing, and watching. She knew that somehow her life was intertwined with the story of that woman, and a new determination began to form in her mind. It was time to unravel the mysteries surrounding her and discover what really happened to Margaret. Emily was determined to uncover the secrets surrounding the old house and its mysterious resident, Margaret. That night, the storm intensified, with lightning cutting across the sky and thunder echoing as if the sky itself was in agony. The heavy atmosphere seemed to pulse with palpable energy, and the shadow in her room now more than a mere illusion, behaved like a living entity. Sitting at the living room table, surrounded by books on history and urban legends, Emily felt the weight of the house's history on her shoulders. She had discovered that Margaret was a talented artist, but her life was marked by tragedies and mysteries. "Why did you disappear, Margaret?" Emily murmured to herself, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The sound of rain hitting the windows seemed like a distant response, a song of lament. As the rain fell, Emily decided to explore the house for clues. The wooden floor creaked under her feet as she walked down the hallway, illuminated only by the flickering light of a lantern. Every shadow seemed to dance in response to her movements, and the feeling of being watched followed her like a heavy cloak. Passing through the living room, she spotted a painting adrift, covered by a dusty cloth. Curious, she approached, and with a hesitant motion, removed the cloth. The painting made her freeze. It was a portrait of a woman with intense and melancholy eyes. "Margaret," Emily whispered, recognizing the artist she had studied. The portrait was in a sorry state, but the woman's beauty was undeniable. "What happened to you?" Emily felt an inexplicable connection with the depicted figure, as if Margaret was trying to communicate through the worn canvas. Thunder rumbled, and in a moment of distraction, Emily heard a soft whisper, almost like a call. "Emily." The name floated in the air and she turned quickly, but no one was there. Her racing heart pounded in her throat, and a mixture of fear and excitement enveloped her. "I'm going crazy," she thought, but part of her knew she wasn't alone. As the storm raged outside, Emily decided to investigate what else was hidden in the house. With a keen eye, she began to examine the walls, searching for any hidden compartments. As she ran her hand along the living room wall, something made her stop. A small protrusion in the wood seemed out of place. With a push, she pressed it, and part of the wall opened, revealing a secret compartment. Inside, there was a dusty diary, its pages yellowed and fragile as if time had guarded those secrets with 7 keys. Emily pulled the diary out, feeling a wave of anticipation and dread. "What do you have to tell me, Margaret?" She sat on the floor, the lantern's light casting a dancing shadow around her as she began to flip through the pages. The handwritten words were a confession. Margaret wrote about her ambitions as an artist, her lost loves, and the weight of loneliness that surrounded her. The shadow that Emily had often felt seemed to manifest in the diary's words, as if Margaret was trying to explain her connection with the presence that now haunted her. "I can't live without her, but I can't live with her either," Emily read aloud, her words echoing in the silent room. The wind howled outside the house, and the storm seemed to increase in intensity. Each sentence took her deeper into Margaret's mind, and the connection between the two women grew stronger. "She gives me strength, but she also consumes me," Emily continued, feeling the shadow watching her, attentive and threatening. A new flash of lightning illuminated the room, and Emily almost screamed as she saw the shadow stir, taking shape. "Margaret," she called out, a mix of fear and hope in her voice, but the response came as a whisper, soft, almost like a prayer. "Help me." The storm raged outside, but inside the house, time seemed to have stopped. Emily knew she was about to discover something profound, something that could change not only Margaret's life, but her own. The diary was full of secrets, and with each page she turned, she felt closer to understanding the pact that bound the two women. "What do you want from me, Margaret?" Emily asked aloud, her voice reflecting the echo of uncertainty and determination. And so, in that tense moment, with the storm as a witness, Emily realized that the shadow was not just a symbol of fear, but an urgent call for her to take action. The mystery was unfolding, and she was about to discover the truth, long buried in the history of that Victorian house. Emily sat on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by yellowed papers and the musty smell emanating from Margaret's diary. The dim light from the lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an even more immersive and unsettling atmosphere. With each page she turned, the young designer felt closer to the house's former resident. Margaret's words seemed to pulse with life, revealing not only her joys and hopes, but also her deepest fears. She felt the presence of the shadow too, Emily murmured to herself, her eyes shining with the discovery. It guided her, but it also destroyed her. The connection between them was undeniable and at the same time terrifying. Margaret's vivid descriptions of her experiences left her unsettled. The artist frequently mentioned a shadow that inspired her work, but had, over time, become an oppressive entity. Emily paused to reflect. Could this be the same shadow that's here now? She remembered how the shadow in her room seemed to have a will of its own, watching her every move. The idea terrified and fascinated her at the same time. If Margaret couldn't escape, what does that mean for me? The artist's words echoed in her mind. The shadow is both a muse and an executioner. With a sudden impulse, Emily decided she needed to see the painting Margaret had mentioned so many times in her diary. It was a painting that, according to the notes, contained the artist's essence and possibly the key to understanding the shadow itself. She got up, determination solidifying in her chest, and walked toward the living room, where she had first seen the painting. When she arrived, the atmosphere felt different, as if the house was holding its breath. The canvas, framed in worn gold, seemed to almost glow in the soft moonlight filtering through the windows. Emily hesitated for a moment, a shiver running down her spine, but the shadow in her room seemed to whisper her name, beckoning her to come closer. "Margaret," she called, her voice a soft echo. "What do you want from me?" There was no immediate response, only the heavy silence of the old house. The painting displayed a stunning landscape, full of vibrant colors that, at first glance, seemed cheerful. But as Emily approached, she noticed dark nuances that seemed to stir beneath the surface. "You're calling me, aren't you?" Emily asked, feeling the shadow's presence intensify around her. The sensation was almost tangible, like a light touch on her skin. Then, suddenly, she was taken by a vision. The painting's colors began to swirl, and images of Margaret's life began to manifest. She saw the artist in different stages of her life, painting with fervor, surrounded by admirers, but also alone and tormented. "This isn't just a painting," Emily whispered, understanding the depth of the connection. "It's your soul." A shiver ran through her body, and suddenly, the shadow in the room began to writhe as if reacting to her realization. "You're trapped here, aren't you?" As soon as these words left her lips, the shadow intensified, and suddenly, Emily found herself immersed in a new vision. Now, she was no longer just observing. She was living Margaret's moments. She felt the excitement of creation, the pain of loss, and lastly, the despair that drove the artist to the brink of madness. "Margaret!" Emily shouted, desperate to free herself from the whirlwind of emotions that surrounded her. "I can help you, but I need to understand." The response came in the form of an icy whisper that enveloped her body, as if the shadow itself was trying to guide her. "You must discover the truth," the voice echoed in her mind, confused and fragmented. "The truth about the painting, about the pact I made." Despair and the need for understanding mixed in her heart, and Emily knew there was something deeper that needed to be revealed. The feeling of being trapped between two worlds began to afflict her mind, and she felt the shadow drawing closer, as if it wanted to push her closer to the canvas. With one last look at the painting, she realized she couldn't ignore the connection they had. "Margaret, we are connected. We won't let this destroy us." The challenge hung in the air, and as the shadow loomed larger, Emily knew the battle for the truth had only just begun. Materi. The sun's rays filtering through the trees, creating a play of light and shadow that seemed to dance around her. The air was heavy with a silence that enveloped her, and each step she took was accompanied by a growing sense of anxiety. She held tightly to a crumpled piece of paper where she had written down Margaret's name and the location of her grave, which Tom had pointed out. "Margaret Adams. Where are you?" Emily murmured, her voice almost lost among the weather-worn tombstones. She felt drawn by an invisible force, as if the earth's roots were pulling her toward a destiny she did not yet understand. Finally, her eyes fixed on a grave adorned with wilted flowers, the name engraved on a pale marble stone. The date of death, much earlier than Emily could have imagined, seemed to echo in her mind. "It's here," she said to herself, kneeling before the tombstone. The cold of the stone seemed to pierce her skin, and for a moment, she hesitated. What did she hope to find there? A tale of sorrow, an echo of a lost life, a connection that transcended time and space. She ran her palm down the surface of the tombstone, feeling the gravity of the moment. At that moment, a gentle breeze passed by, bringing with it a whisper that seemed to be lost words. Emily looked around, but the cemetery was deserted. "Margaret," she called, her voice trembling. "You need to listen to me." Spine as a shadow was cast before her, forming a silhouette reminiscent of a woman's figure. Emily's heart raced, but instead of fleeing, she felt compelled to stay. The figure took shape, revealing itself as Margaret, with an expression that mixed sadness and determination. "You came," Margaret's voice was soft, but there was a weight of desperation. "You need to understand what happened." I'm trying," Emily replied, her voice almost a whisper. "I saw your shadow. It guided me, but what do you want from me?" Margaret's expression became more serious. "A pact was made in this house, a pact that bound me to it. The shadow you see, it's not just a presence. It's the echo of what I left behind, a connection that cannot be broken until the truth is revealed." Emily frowned, confused. "What truth? What do you need me to do?" "You need to free both of us. The pact that tied me to life and my art is the same chain that binds you. You have the power to undo it," Margaret explained, her eyes shining with an intensity Emily had never seen before. "But it's risky. You must be willing to confront the darkness." "Confront the darkness?" Emily repeated, fear growing in her chest. "But what if I can't? What if it consumes me?" "If you don't, the shadow will take you away, just as it took me," Margaret warned, the shadow around her seeming to stir. "You're already losing control, Emily. The art you create, the life you live, all of it is being affected. You must act before it's too late." Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The sense of urgency was palpable, and the idea of being trapped in a struggle she didn't understand terrified her. But at the same time, there was a spark of determination beginning to ignite within her. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice now firm. "Return to the house, face the shadow, and uncover the truth hidden within its walls. Only then can we be free," Margaret replied, the figure beginning to slowly fade away like smoke in the wind. "Remember, Emily, art is more powerful than you imagine. Use it." With her heart pounding, Emily watched Margaret's shadow disappear into the air, leaving her alone in the cemetery. She knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but the determination to unravel the mystery pushed her forward. As she left the cemetery, the echo of Margaret's words resonated in her mind. She was not just fighting for herself, but for a soul that had been lost in time. And for the first time, Emily felt truly alive, ready to face the shadow that awaited her at home. Emily was in the living room of the old Victorian house, her heart pounding at a frantic pace as the shadow danced on the walls, pulsing like a living organism. The room was shrouded in a dense twilight, and the air seemed to vibrate with strange, almost palpable energy. The candlelight flickered, casting contorted shadows, intertwining fear and curiosity in her chest. She looked at the painting that had so disturbed her, an impressive work by Margaret. The colors, a mix of deep blues and dark greens, seemed to vibrate as if they held a life of their own. "Margaret," Emily whispered, feeling the presence of the artist like a cold breeze that swept through the room. "What do you want from me?" The shadow, which had remained in a corner of the room until then, began to take shape, forming contours that resembled a feminine figure. It was as if Margaret was there, watching her, guiding her. "You know what needs to be done," echoed a voice soft but firm, seeming to come from all directions at once. "I am part of you, and you are part of me. To free me is to free yourself." Emily swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she approached the painting. "But how can I do that? I don't want to hurt you." Her eyes fixed on the canvas, the beauty of the painting almost hypnotizing her. However, Margaret's voice brought her back to reality. "Beauty comes at a price, Emily, and I paid dearly for it." An intense cold ran down Emily's spine as she remembered the words from the diary she had read. The pact, the promise Margaret had made in exchange for her art. "I can't just destroy something so beautiful," she stammered, hesitating. The shadow seemed to stir as if Margaret herself was feeling her resistance. "You don't understand, Emily. This painting is a prison. I'm not just an artist. I'm a spirit imprisoned by my own ambition. You have the power to free me. Do it." The voice sounded more intense now, almost pleading. Summoning her courage, Emily positioned herself in front of the canvas, her heart pounding. "So, this is what you want? For me to destroy your life? Your legacy?" She felt a tear slide down her face, mixing with the sense of guilt. "This isn't fair." Justice? Art isn't fair. It never was. It is a reflection of pain and beauty, and I am trapped between them. The shadow took a step forward, and Emily could see Margaret's eyes, full of despair and hope. Taking a deep breath, she raised her hand, her palm sweating. "I'm going to do this, Margaret, for you and for me." With a determined move, she grabbed a table knife that was on the table beside her. The blade gleamed under the candlelight, and with a swift slash, she tore the canvas. The sound of the canvas ripping echoed through the room, like a scream of liberation. In an instant, a wave of light enveloped the room. The shadow writhed, contorting in a frenzied dance before dissolving, like sand slipping through fingers. "Thank you," Margaret whispered, her voice now soft, almost ethereal. "You brought the freedom I couldn't find." Emily fell to her knees, the weight of the action hitting her like a tsunami. Tears flowed freely, but now they were tears of relief. The air felt lighter, and the house, once oppressive, now felt full of life. With one last look at the space where Margaret's shadow had been, Emily smiled. She had found her own voice, not as an echo of another, but as an original song. "Goodbye, Margaret. I'll never forget you," she promised as the morning light began to filter through the window, bringing with it a new beginning.